Yup, welcome back. Now, before we get started today, a quick reminder that only a few days left now where you can get 28% off, 28% off, would you believe, off these fantastic AOC TFT systems, giving you Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, tyre pressure monitoring and high definition video recording front and rear. 28% off through the affiliate link in the description below, and that finishes on the 5th of December, so get this and a move on. Woohoo! Now let's crack on. Now often when I'm out riding alone, I like to stop at some quiet spot in the landscape and let the peace wash over me. It lets me forget for a moment this mad, corrupt, morally bankrupt country we live in, and to remember fondly a time when as a child such matters were of no concern and more ordinary things vied for my attention. What's your very earliest memory? If you're like me, you'll have a handful of early childhood recollections which you'll find difficult to order chronologically. I think that my oldest recollection was of choking on a boiled sweet, and my sister, older by 13 years, upending me and dislodging the obstruction by booting me squarely in the back. Apparently, my complexion quickly returned from blue to pink, and my premature death at the age of 3 was mercifully avoided. Then I recall my very first day at school, specifically Thornbury Infant School in Bradford. I'd have been about 5 years old, and this event marked the transition from nursery daycare to childhood education. For 5 days a week I would now leave the cosy world of toys, games, nursery rhymes and gripe water behind and begin a new life of free school milk, dodgy school dinners and a disciplined environment in which learning was required and failure had consequences. I recall clearly the moment that my mother left me in the school grounds, and I was to place my trust in the hands of strangers. Even at such a young age, I recognised that teachers were a different breed to the nursery hands to which I'd previously become accustomed. I felt frightened and alone, and of course I bawled my eyes out as I watched my mum disappear off to work. In my mind, I had been abandoned and betrayed, and the hard fact of schooling being a legal requirement placed upon my full-time working parents was far from my thoughts, and in any case, well beyond my understanding. I changed schools just 2 times thereafter as I progressed to junior school and then secondary education at a brand new mixed comprehensive school called Carlton Bolling, which was formed as the result of a merger between Carlton Boys School and Bolling Girls School. I don't recall either of these transitions to be as traumatic as that first day at school back in 1967. The next event seared into my memory was the day I was left at Bradford Children's Hospital to have my tonsils removed. I'd have been around 7 years old and had had several bouts of tonsillitis, and back in the 60s there was but one response to such a state of affairs: whip them out. Bradford Children's Hospital was an old Yorkshire stone building located in the Manningham area of Bradford, just a stone's throw from where I would be based as a traffic cop many years later. The hospital was a circular building, almost like a scale model of the Colosseum, and to me every bit as intimidating. I was to spend the night there before being operated upon the following day. I felt again that acute sense of abandonment and betrayal as my parents left me there. It was my first ever night away from home, and I remember clearly outstretching my arms from the bed as they left the ward in a last desperate attempt to get them to carry me away from that place and back to the home where I belonged. After 2 long nights in that place, I was discharged and returned to our small terraced house. In spite of being both sore and drowsy, that bus journey was probably the best I'd ever have. Home saw me treated to a warm bowl of Campbell's chicken soup and the privilege of spending a day laid under a blanket with a hot water bottle on the lounge settee. Contented does not do it justice. Of course, there are many events from our childhood which get lost in the mists of time and are never relived through memory. Looking back now, I have no doubt that there would have been many traumas deemed solely as matters for the adult world and thus of no consequence to a child. In that sense, our parents shield us from many real world anxieties, much like a bird's wing above its fledglings on a cold rainy day. My next vivid memory also concerns a hospital visit early in life. I was, I suppose, 10 years old, and like most kids living in inner city working class communities, I had a cohort of friends with whom I could act out any number of creative scenarios, from cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, Batman and Robin, or just chase and scare the girls, and other set pieces which would no doubt today be regarded as inappropriate, but which, back then, were just part of growing up. The frequent injuries sustained during these activities was simply regarded as character building by the adults, who were happy to see us out from under their feet until the predetermined hour of our mandatory return to base. The injury I was to sustain acting out another favourite fantasy, however, stretched that principle a little too far. Many of those set pieces we played out were based upon the popular TV programmes of the day. Just the action ones, of course, because acting out the average episode of Coronation Street or Crossroads would have had little appeal. But there was no shortage of corny TV creations like Tarzan to stimulate our imaginations, and it was whilst acting out this particular superhero's adventures that I came to grief. There was an area of land not 5 minutes walk from home which sat at the side of Gain Lane in Bradford. Around its periphery were a number of prefab garages serving the few unfortunate car owners living thereabouts. Most of these outbuildings had corrugated asbestos roofs and even asbestos walls, and we would frequently utilise their structures like film sets for our mock shootouts with cap guns from Carter's toy shop. Of course, this was all before the dangers of asbestos were known about. The land adjacent to these garages was a mixture of unkept grass and soil, punctuated by the occasional tree. 2 of these trees were our Tarzan specials, and were frequently to be found sporting a skipping rope or old washing line tied to an upper branch for the purposes of allowing Tarzan to swing from one tree to his Jane on the other. Janes were usually imaginary, unless we were very lucky. I have to smile now at the thought of how these activities would be regarded today by the Health and Safety Brigade. Swinging tree to tree from an old washing line 20 feet above the ground in an area full of asbestos would surely be right up there on the list of risky pursuits, on a par perhaps with activities such as trying to play the trumpet after taking laxatives. But these were simpler, less complicated times, when levels of risk were assigned after a disaster, not in anticipation of one. So it was that this particular late afternoon, when Mum was preparing the tea after work and Dad was in the local pub after work, that I decided to while away the cooking time for double egg and chips by practising my Tarzan routine up at those 2 trees on the asbestos-laden land, which was locally known simply as the garages. My fellow jungle warriors were nowhere to be found on this day, so alone I climbed the bigger of the 2 trees with the intention of striking a pose in the manner of Ron Ely, imaginary dagger clenched between my teeth, imaginary chimp at my side, and imaginary Jane awaiting rescue from the opposite tree to which she had been mercilessly lashed by local savages. However, before I had the chance to commence my reverie, I slipped and fell and snagged my upper right arm on a broken branch. The pain was excruciating, and I immediately knew that this was not one of the usual scrapes. Whatever I'd done, a tub of Germaline and an elastoplast wouldn't do the trick this time. I remember running home and protesting to my mother that I'd hurt my arm on a tree branch. She put the chip pan to one side and pulled off my jumper, no doubt expecting to find the usual inconsequential scrape or bruise. But when most of the muscle and inner tissues of my arm dropped out of a gaping gash as wide as the Joker's smile, she became momentarily speechless. I couldn't quite comprehend the injury. I'd never seen the inside of an arm before, and certainly not my own. And what was that straight-looking white thing beneath all the red mush? Also on the list of the things we didn't have back then, like a car, a colour TV, a fridge, central heating, was a telephone. Fortunately, an aunt and uncle lived across the road, and they did have a telephone, albeit on what was known as a party line. For those unfamiliar with early 1970s telecommunications, a party line was a telephone line shared between households. Only one household at a time could use the party line, and this required high levels of cooperation between said parties. I was later to learn that as Mum landed breathless and announced urgent need of an ambulance for me, that the party line was currently being utilised by a neighbour, discussing, I'm told, the latest episode of Brett, starring Patrick Allen, ironically a heartthrob of both my mother and aunt at the time. Fortunately for me, a ripped open arm trumped idle gossip concerning Mr. Allen's real-life peccadilloes, which would have to wait until after the ambulance was called. Meanwhile, Dad had returned in relatively high spirits from the boozer, but came crashing down to earth upon realising that his double egg and chips would be late. Very late. Within a very short time, the ambulance arrived. Yes, that used to happen back then. And 2 serge tunic wearing men with barely a first aid badge between them pronounced that I had a wound to my arm and that it needed stitching. Since I had not apparently torn any major blood vessels, I was denied the Blues and Twos run to the Bradford Royal Infirmary, which I remember finding rather disappointing in spite of my predicament. No bragging rights for school then. 17 stitches, both internal and external, later, and I'm back home. Tarzan was banned from the TV for the foreseeable future, and I was back at school the next day in a sling. Well, we were made of stronger stuff back then. But what all of this suggests to me is that those decades ago we were all far better at coping with life's occasional dramas. Life today, on the other hand, seems at times to be racked with anxiety, moral panic and general hysteria over issues which in the grand scheme of things are nothing more than passing and manageable situations. I'll say